Note: please write out years and numbers. So 1944 should be 1944, 03:15 hours, June 23rd, 1944. Corporal James Sullivan crouched in his foxhole 3 miles inland from Omaha Beach, watching a German SDKF 22 armored car crawl toward his position. 400 yards out, engine noise like a sewing machine, steady and mechanical. The smell of wet hedgerow dirt filled his nose. His mouth tasted like copper and fear. His hand rested on a detonator he wasn't supposed to have. The armored car's headlights cut through the darkness, 2 yellow beams sweeping the road ahead. Sullivan could see 3 Germans inside. Commander standing in the turret, driver hunched over the wheel, gunner at the 20mm cannon. They were moving slow, cautious, looking for mines. They'd find one. The decoy Sullivan had planted 30 yards up the road, obvious enough to spot, believable enough to investigate. And 30 yards beyond that decoy, buried where their vehicle would park while they examined it, was something that would kill all 3 of them. 72 hours earlier, Sullivan's company commander had ordered him to dismantle this exact setup. Had stood over him while he dug up the pressure plate, disarmed the striker, removed the explosive charge. Had told him unauthorized ordnance gets people killed. Had told him regulations exist for reasons. Captain Brennan was sleeping 200 yards away right now. In 8 seconds, the explosion would wake him. And Sullivan would have to explain why he'd disobeyed a direct order. The German armored car stopped at 300 yards. Sullivan watched and waited. 10 days earlier, June 10, 1944, the Third Battalion's engineering officer had compiled statistics that made Sullivan's stomach turn. 88 American anti-tank mines laid across the battalion sector. 11 German vehicles destroyed. 77 mines bypassed. Effectiveness rate, 12%. In the first week after D-Day, that number had been 43%. German drivers hadn't learned to spot American mines yet. They'd driven over them. They'd died. Their vehicles had burned. But by the second week, German reconnaissance crews had adapted. They slowed down at dusk. They dismounted at suspicious ground. They probed with long wooden poles. They used metal detectors scavenged from destroyed engineer vehicles. They marked safe paths with white tape. They drove around the mines. And then they killed Americans. 17 soldiers dead in the past 9 days. Not from mines. From German scouts who'd identified weak points in American defenses after bypassing the mine barriers that were supposed to stop them. 2nd Platoon lost 9 men on June 8th. German motorcycle scouts bypassed 4 mines, mapped the approach routes, called in an infantry assault. The attack came at 0200 hours. Americans repelled it, but 9 men died doing it. 3rd Platoon lost 6 men on June 9th. Same pattern. Germans bypassed mines, identified firing positions, brought up mortars. 6 men dead before dawn. Battalion command kept issuing the same orders. Lay more mines. Use standard M1 anti-tank mines. Follow doctrine. Trust the manual. Sullivan had read the manual, had memorized it during engineer training at Fort Belvoir. The manual was written by men who'd never watched Germans walk around American mines like they were traffic cones. Germans weren't stupid. They'd adapted. Americans hadn't. Corporal James Sullivan was 32 years old, which made him ancient by infantry standards. Most combat engineers were 19, 20, maybe 22. Sullivan had gray in his hair, lines around his eyes, hands that looked like weathered wood. He'd spent 12 years as a hard rock miner in Butte, Montana before the war. 12 years underground, drilling copper ore in spaces so tight he had to exhale to fit through them. 12 years understanding pressure, weight distribution, explosive force, how rock fractures under stress, how supports fail, how one mistake kills everyone in the tunnel. Mining teaches you to see problems three-dimensionally. To calculate what happens when you remove weight here, add pressure there, detonate a charge in this exact spot at this exact angle. To think 5 steps ahead, because underground, there's no time to think when things go wrong. Sullivan had joined the Army in December 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor. They'd made him a combat engineer. He'd been overseas 41 months. North Africa, Sicily, Omaha Beach on D-Day +1. He'd built bridges under fire, cleared mines under mortar bombardment, blown up obstacles while Germans shot at him. He was good at it. Best combat engineer in the battalion, according to his efficiency reports. Also the most likely to ignore regulations, according to the same reports. His hands were permanently stained with copper residue from his mining days. His knuckles were scarred from 12 years of underground work. He moved like someone who'd spent his life in confined spaces, economical, deliberate, no wasted motion. On June 11th, Sullivan examined a bypassed American mine for the 4th time that week. The mine sat in the middle of a dirt road, exactly where doctrine said to place it. Clearly visible in daylight, obvious at night with a flashlight. German boot prints surrounded it, dozens of them. Sullivan knelt and studied the marks, saw where they'd probed with poles, saw where they'd swept with metal detectors, saw where they'd marked the bypass route with white tape that was still tied to a fence post. The bypass path went around the left side of the mine, through a gap in the hedgerow, back onto the road, 20 yards beyond the obstacle. Perfect German engineering. Methodical, documented, safe. Sullivan measured the bypass path, memorized the pattern, noted how Germans approached mines, how they stopped, how they investigated, how they marked their route, how they continued. He didn't see mines as obstacles anymore. He saw them as bait. That evening, June 11th, Sullivan sat in his foxhole and stared at a piece of metal half buried in the road 30 yards away. A rusted German shovel blade. Entrenching tool, probably. Left behind when they'd retreated after D-Day. The blade had been there for a week. Sullivan had watched American jeeps drive over it, watched supply trucks roll across it, watched a Sherman tank track crush it deeper into the dirt. Nobody noticed it. It was invisible. It belonged there. That's when the idea formed. German vehicles drove over that shovel blade because it looked like debris, felt like debris under their tires. They didn't slow down for it, didn't stop to investigate, didn't mark it on their maps. What if that shovel blade wasn't debris? What if it was a trigger? Sullivan knew pressure-activated mines. Step on the plate, compress the spring, release the striker, detonate the charge. Simple mechanics. The weight of a vehicle or a person activates the explosive. But what if you reversed it? What if the mine didn't trigger when weight was added, but when weight was removed? The engineering made sense. Germans spot an obvious mine. They stop to investigate. They park their vehicle on a hidden pressure plate that looks like road debris. They examine the obvious mine. They confirm it's American. They mark a bypass route. They return to their vehicle. They drive forward. And when the vehicle's weight lifts off the pressure plate, the spring releases. Sullivan did the math in his head. German SDKFZ 222 armored car weighs approximately 4,000 pounds. Park that on a compressed spring strong enough to hold 4,000 pounds. When the vehicle moves forward, weight lifts off. Spring extends. Striker hits primer. Explosion. Delay from weight removal to detonation. Maybe half a second, maybe less. Long enough for the vehicle to move 5 feet forward, which puts the explosion directly under the rear axle. Sullivan drew the design in the dirt with a stick. Pressure plate on the road surface. Spring compressed underneath. Striker mechanism connected to explosive charge. Cover everything with road dirt and gravel. Position it 30 yards beyond an obvious decoy mine. Wait for Germans to stop and investigate. Watch them park on the plate. Watch them examine the decoy. Watch them drive forward into the explosion. Sullivan erased the drawing before morning. But he couldn't erase the design from his mind. Between June 12th and June 14th, Sullivan collected materials. He worked alone, after dark. Told nobody what he was doing. He found 6 rusted German entrenching tool blades in abandoned positions. The Germans had retreated fast after D-Day. They'd left equipment everywhere. The shovel blades were worthless as tools, rusted through, handles broken off, perfect as camouflage. He salvaged springs from destroyed German vehicles, truck suspension coils, strong enough to hold vehicle weight, compact enough to bury under a road surface. The explosive components came from 8 German Teller mine fuses, duds that EOD had recovered and logged as destroyed. Sullivan had logged them as destroyed too. Then he'd stored them in his pack instead of throwing them in the disposal pit. He found telephone wire at a destroyed German communications post, stripped the insulation, kept the copper core. For covers, he used road dirt, gravel, fragments of destroyed equipment, anything that looked like it belonged on a Norman road in June 1944. June 14th, Sullivan assembled the first prototype, worked on it for 3 hours in his foxhole after midnight. The mechanism was simple. Pressure plate on top, spring underneath, striker connected to the spring. When weight compressed the spring, the striker cocked. When weight lifted, the spring released. The striker fired into the Teller mine fuse. The fuse detonated the explosive charge. Sullivan tested it with sandbags, stacked them on the pressure plate until the spring compressed fully, approximated the weight of a German armored car. Then he removed 1 sandbag. The spring released smoothly. The striker fired. The mechanism worked. Sullivan installed the first system on June 15th. 30 yards beyond an obvious decoy mine on the road, approaching 2nd Platoon's position. The installation took 2 hours. He buried the shovel blade flush with the road surface, positioned it where it looked like debris, where vehicle tires would roll over it naturally, where Germans would park while they investigated the decoy mine ahead. By June 17th, Sullivan had installed 12 systems, 12 pressure-release triggers, 12 buried shovel blades, 12 compressed springs waiting for German vehicles. He told nobody, created no engineering reports, drew no mine maps, requested no EOD clearance. Corporal Eddie Kowalski noticed Sullivan working near the decoy mines one night, asked what he was doing with those shovel blades. "Making the Germans think twice," Sullivan said. Kowalski looked at him for 5 seconds, then nodded. Didn't ask more questions. Didn't tell officers. Combat engineers who survive 41 months overseas learn when not to follow regulations. June 18th, 1400 hours. Captain Howard Brennan conducted his routine defensive position inspection. He was 28 years old. West Point, class of 1940. He'd commanded the company since Sicily. By-the-book officer, competent, fair. Followed doctrine because doctrine kept soldiers alive. Brennan watched Sullivan working near a decoy mine. Something about Sullivan's posture seemed wrong. Too focused, too deliberate. "Corporal, what are you doing?" Sullivan hesitated. Half a second. But Brennan caught it. "Maintenance on the mine, sir." "Show me." Sullivan stood. Led Brennan to the decoy mine, explained it was positioned correctly according to the manual. Brennan examined it, then noticed disturbed earth 30 yards beyond it. Walked to that spot. Saw faint marks in the road surface. "What's this?" Sullivan said nothing for 3 seconds. Then explained. The pressure release mechanism, the shovel blade trigger, the scavenged German components, the spring-loaded striker, the delayed detonation designed to catch German vehicles after they investigated the decoy. Brennan listened without interrupting. When Sullivan finished, Brennan was silent for 15 seconds. Then he identified the 3 violations. Non-standard trigger mechanisms require engineering approval from division headquarters. You don't have that approval. No, sir. Employment of enemy ordnance requires EOD certification and documentation. You don't have that documentation. No, sir. Improvised explosive devices must be cleared by Battalion S3, logged and mapped. You haven't done any of that. No, sir. How many of these did you install? 12, sir. Brennan stared at the disturbed earth, at the road, at the decoy mine, at Sullivan. Remove them, all of them, by 1800 hours today. Yes, sir. Corporal, I understand you're trying to help, but unauthorized ordnance gets people killed. What if one of our own vehicles hits it? What if it detonates during a patrol? What if a civilian drives through here after we advance? Regulations exist for reasons. Sullivan said nothing. Just began dismantling the first system. June 23rd, 0600 hours. Captain Brennan entered the battalion commander's morning briefing, carrying a report he'd written in the 3 hours since the explosion woke him. His hands smelled like burned metal and German gasoline. His uniform still had dust from the crater on it. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Hargrove, sat at the head of a scarred wooden table in what used to be a French farmhouse. Maps covered every wall. Radio traffic crackled from the corner. The S2 intelligence officer was finishing his nightly summary. 4 German probes, 3 bypassed American minefields, 1 firefight, 2 American casualties. Hargrove looked exhausted. 46 years old, West Point class of 1920, he'd commanded the battalion since North Africa. Good officer, careful, conservative. He followed doctrine because 19 months of combat had taught him that improvisation got people killed more often than it saved them. Captain Brennan, Hargrove said, your sector had some excitement last night. Yes, sir. German SDKFZ 222 armored car destroyed at 0315 hours. 3 enemy killed. No American casualties. The S3 operations officer looked up from his notes. How? I didn't think we had active mines in that sector. Brennan placed his report on the table. We do now, sir. Corporal Sullivan developed an improvised pressure release mine system using salvaged materials and captured German ordnance. The system uses decoy mines to draw German attention while the actual explosive trigger is positioned 30 yards beyond the decoy. Silence in the room. 6 officers staring at Brennan. Hargrove picked up the report, read the first page. His expression didn't change. Let me understand this correctly. Your engineer built unauthorized explosive devices using enemy ordnance without EOD clearance or engineering approval from division? Yes, sir. And you ordered him to dismantle them? Yes, sir, I did. On June 18th at 1400 hours. But he reinstalled them anyway? Yes, sir, without my knowledge or authorization. Hargrove set the report down, looked at Brennan for 10 seconds. You're asking me what to do about this? No, sir. I'm reporting a successful engagement that killed 3 Germans and destroyed a reconnaissance vehicle. The S3 operations officer spoke up. Sir, German reconnaissance has bypassed 237 of our standard mines. This is our first vehicle kill in 12 days. The S2 intelligence officer added, Germans are systematically mapping our mine defenses for a major assault. If they can't trust their reconnaissance data. Hargrove held up one hand. Silence returned. He looked at Brennan again. Does the system work reliably? It worked last night, sir. Sullivan believes he can replicate it consistently. Believes? Yes, sir. He's only tested it once in actual combat conditions. Hargrove opened the report again, read through Brennan's technical description, the pressure release mechanism, the shovel blade camouflage, the scavenged components, the installation procedure. Then he closed the report and made his decision. I want a demonstration. Today. 1,500 hours. If this system works consistently, I want it on every approach road in the battalion sector. If it doesn't work, I want Sullivan court-martialed for disobeying direct orders and endangering American lives with unauthorized ordnance. Yes, sir. Dismissed. 1,500 hours, June 23rd. Sullivan stood in a test area 200 yards behind battalion lines, installing a pressure release system while 6 officers watched him work. Battalion commander, 3 company commanders, the engineering platoon leader, the S3 operations officer. Nobody spoke while Sullivan worked, just watched his hands move through the installation sequence. He'd brought a captured German Kubelwagen for the test. 4-wheeled utility vehicle, 400 pounds lighter than the SDKFZ 222 he'd destroyed last night, but close enough to demonstrate the principle. Sullivan dug a 6-inch cavity in the dirt road, positioned the rusted shovel blade as a pressure plate, installed the compressed spring mechanism underneath, connected the striker to a German Teller mine fuse, positioned the explosive charge 4 feet behind the pressure plate, covered everything with road dirt and gravel. Then he walked 30 yards forward and placed an obvious decoy mine in the middle of the road. Installation time, 1 hour 40 minutes. When he finished, Sullivan stood and addressed the officers directly. First time most of them had heard him speak more than 3 words. Decoy mine draws German attention, Sullivan said. His voice was flat, factual, no emotion. Forces them to stop and investigate. Vehicle parks on the pressure plate while the crew examines the decoy. Plate looks like road debris. Feels like debris under tires. Germans don't notice it. He pointed at the buried shovel blade. Even knowing where it was, the officers could barely see it. When the vehicle advances forward after investigating the decoy, weight lifts off the plate. Spring releases the striker into the German fuse. Explosive detonates under the rear axle as the vehicle moves. Total system cost, $0. All salvaged materials. Installation time, 2 hours per system once you know the procedure. Hargrove stepped forward. What's the failure rate? Don't know yet, sir. Only tested once in combat. Worked perfectly. What if American vehicles drive over the pressure plate? Won't detonate, sir. Requires weight to compress the spring, then requires that weight to be removed. American vehicles would have to stop directly on the plate, then drive forward. Standard traffic just rolls over it. What if infantry steps on it? Spring requires approximately 3,000 pounds to compress fully. Infantry won't trigger it. What if the spring fails? Then nothing happens, sir. Fail-safe design. Spring has to release for the striker to fire. Hargrove looked at the installation, at the decoy mine, at the buried pressure plate that looked exactly like a piece of road debris. Show me. Sullivan had rigged the Kubelwagen with remote controls. Steering wheel locked, throttle cable extended, brake release mechanism. He could operate it from 50 yards away. The vehicle rolled forward. Sullivan stopped it directly on top of the buried pressure plate. Let it sit for 30 seconds, simulating a German crew dismounting to investigate the decoy mine. Then Sullivan released the brake and let the vehicle roll forward 5 feet. 0.8 seconds later, the explosion shattered the morning quiet. The Kübelwagen's rear axle separated from the chassis. The fuel tank ruptured. Metal fragments punched through the vehicle floor. If there had been a crew inside, all of them would have died. Hargrove watched the burning wreckage for 15 seconds, then turned to Sullivan. "How many systems can you install by tomorrow night?" "With help, sir, maybe 20. Hargrove looked at the engineering platoon leader. "Give him whatever he needs. Men, materials, time. I want these on every approach road where Germans have been conducting reconnaissance." "Yes, sir." Then Hargrove looked at Brennan. "Your engineer disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir, he did." "Did that direct order save German lives or American lives?" Brennan said nothing for 3 seconds. "German lives, sir." "Then it was a bad order. Rescinded as of now. Sullivan, you're authorized to install as many of these systems as battalion operations requires. You'll document each installation. You'll create mind maps. You'll coordinate with EOD for proper handling of German ordnance. You'll train other engineers on the installation procedure. Clear?" "Yes, sir." "And Corporal?" "Sir?" "Next time you invent something that kills Germans, tell your company commander before you deploy it. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Between June 23rd and June 26th, Sullivan's world changed completely. He went from working alone in the dark to commanding a 6-man team, from hiding his work to documenting every installation, from scrounging materials to having EOD deliver captured German teller mines with proper paperwork. The engineering platoon leader assigned him 5 combat engineers. Sullivan spent 4 hours teaching them the installation procedure: how to position the pressure plate, how to calibrate spring tension, how to camouflage the system, how to place decoy mines at the correct distance. Each 2-man team could install 3 systems per night. Sullivan's team worked from June 23rd through June 26th. 72 hours of continuous installation. They slept in 4-hour shifts, ate cold rations, worked through darkness and dawn. The shovel blades came from salvaged German equipment and damaged American tools. Nobody cared if a shovel blade was American or German as long as it looked like road debris. The springs came from destroyed vehicle suspensions. The battalion maintenance section provided a dozen compression springs from wrecked trucks and jeeps. The strikers were fabricated in the battalion machine shop. Simple firing pins, spring-loaded, designed to punch into German teller mine fuses with enough force to trigger the chemical igniter. The explosive charges came from EOD now. Properly documented, properly logged. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the battalion EOD officer, personally delivered 23 captured German teller mines to Sullivan's work area. Each one tagged, serialized, accounted for. "Don't blow yourself up with these," Webb said. "I don't want to write that report." "No, sir." The decoy mines were fabricated from wood and scrap metal, painted olive drab, shaped like American M1 anti-tank mines, obvious enough to spot, believable enough to investigate. By June 26th, Sullivan's teams had installed 47 systems across the battalion sector. Every approach road, every trail wide enough for vehicles, every gap in the hedgerows where German reconnaissance had previously operated. For the first time, Sullivan created proper documentation: mind maps showing each system location, installation dates, team assignments, maintenance schedules. He briefed every American unit in the sector, showed them the maps, explained which roads were safe for American traffic, warned them never to stop on suspicious debris, then advance forward. Battalion issued a standing order: no American vehicles advance through potential mine areas until engineers verify the routes clear. The Germans came back on June 24th, 0230 hours. 1's DKFZ 250 half-track probing 1st Platoon sector. The crew spotted Sullivan's decoy mine from 100 yards. Stopped. Dismounted. 3 Germans walking forward with flashlights and probe poles. The half-track sat idling on Sullivan's pressure plate. While the crew investigated the decoy, Sullivan wasn't there. He was 2 miles away, installing another system. But he'd trained the engineers in 1st Platoon's sector. They knew what was about to happen. The German commander confirmed the decoy was American, called back to his driver. The half-track advanced 5 feet forward. The explosion killed all 4 Germans, destroyed the half-track, created a crater 3 feet deep. June 25th, 0100 hours. 1 motorcycle with sidecar approaching 3rd Platoon. Same pattern. German spot decoy. Stop to investigate. Park on pressure plate. Examine decoy mine. Return to motorcycle. Drive forward. Explosion. 3 Germans dead. Motorcycle destroyed. June 26th, 0340 hours. Another SDKFZ 222 armored car at 2nd Platoon. Same result. Vehicle destroyed. 3 Germans killed. 3 nights. 3 German reconnaissance vehicles. 12 Germans dead. 0 American casualties. By June 27th, German reconnaissance stopped completely. Battalion S2 intercepted German radio traffic that night. The Signals Intelligence Section translated it and delivered the transcript to morning briefing. American mine tactics have changed. Do not approach suspicious objects. Mark locations and withdraw. Repeat, do not investigate American mines. Mark and bypass only. Hargrove read the transcript twice, then looked at his S2. They're scared of the mines now. Yes, sir. They've adapted their tactics, but the adaptation makes their reconnaissance less effective. Explain. Germans can't gather detailed intelligence if they won't approach our positions. They're marking mine locations from a distance and bypassing entire sectors. They don't know our defensive strength, don't know our firing positions, don't know where we're weak. The S3 operations officer added, Intelligence estimates the Germans were preparing a major counterattack for June 29th. That attack has been postponed to July 3rd. Latest intercepts suggest it's been postponed again indefinitely. Hargrove set down the transcript. Because they can't gather reconnaissance? Partially, sir. Also because they've lost 11 reconnaissance vehicles in 4 days. That's 11 crews, 38 trained soldiers. Germans are running low on experienced reconnaissance personnel. Sullivan sat in the back of the briefing room, listening. He'd been ordered to attend morning briefings now. The battalion commander wanted his engineering assessment on defensive positions. Hargrove noticed him. Corporal Sullivan, how many systems do you have installed? 47, sir, as of 0600 hours this morning. How many can you maintain? All of them, sir. Systems don't require much maintenance. Check them weekly. Replace components if weather damage occurs. That's it. Can other battalions replicate this? Sullivan thought about it. Yes, sir. Any combat engineer can learn the installation procedure in 4 hours. Materials are salvaged. Cost is 0. Only limitation is availability of German teller mines for the explosive charges. Hargrove looked at his S3. Get me a meeting with regiment. I want every battalion in the division using these by July 1st. Word spread faster than official orders. By early July, combat engineers from 4 different divisions had heard about Sullivan's pressure release mine system. They called it different things. The Sullivan Special. Delayed action mines. Trap mines. The soldiers just called it the Rusty Shovel. On July 2nd, Sullivan received orders to report to 2nd Division headquarters. He traveled by jeep with his demonstration kit, shovel blade, spring mechanism, striker assembly, teller mine fuse, decoy mine, He gave the same demonstration he'd given for his battalion commander. 23 officers watched. When the test vehicle exploded, they asked the same questions Hargrove had asked. Failure rate? Don't know yet. Only combat testing provides real data. Safety for American forces? System requires specific sequence to detonate. Normal traffic won't trigger it. Installation time? 2 hours per system with trained personnel. Material cost? 0. All salvaged components. Sullivan trained 18 engineers from 2nd Division over 3 days. Then traveled to 29th Division, trained 22 more engineers. Then 4th Division, 17 engineers. By mid-July, approximately 300 pressure release systems were installed across 1st Army's sector in Normandy. The technique spread through informal channels. Engineers talked to engineers. One battalion copied another. Nobody waited for official doctrine updates. They just started installing the systems because the systems worked. Intelligence reports confirmed effectiveness. German vehicle reconnaissance in 1st Army sectors dropped 67% between late June and mid-July. German commanders issued repeated warnings about American trap mines. Several captured German documents referenced delayed explosion devices that detonated after investigation. The Germans never figured out the exact mechanism. They knew American tactics had changed. They knew stopping to investigate mines was deadly. But they never understood the pressure release trigger principle. Some American units modified Sullivan's basic design. 3rd Armored Division engineers used different pressure plates. 82nd Airborne engineers adapted the system for use in barrage fighting. 1st Division engineers experimented with multiple trigger points. But the principle remained constant. Decoy mine draws attention. Pressure plate hidden beyond the decoy. Vehicle parks on plate during investigation. Vehicle drives forward. Weight releases. Explosion. By August, the Army Corps of Engineers sent a technical evaluation team to Normandy. 3 officers with engineering degrees. They interviewed Sullivan, examined his systems, conducted controlled tests, wrote a 40-page report. Their conclusion: the pressure release mine system developed by Corporal James Sullivan represents a significant tactical innovation. Recommend adoption as authorized field expedient for combat engineer operations. The report noted 3 violations of existing regulations. It recommended the regulations be updated. Nobody court-martialed Sullivan. Nobody even reprimanded him. By the time the regulations caught up with reality, 300 systems were already in the ground, killing Germans. July 8, 1944, Sullivan was promoted to sergeant. The promotion orders cited exemplary performance of combat engineering duties and development of innovative mine warfare techniques. July 15th, Sullivan received new orders. Transfer to 1st Infantry Division headquarters. Assignment: training officer for improvised mine systems. He reported to Captain Brennan before leaving. Brennan was in his command post, studying maps of the advance towards St. Lo. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Brennan looked up. "Your transfer orders came through. You're going to division headquarters." "Yes, sir." "You'll be training other engineers, teaching them your pressure release system." "Yes, sir." "You'd rather stay here?" Sullivan said nothing, which was answer enough. Brennan stood and walked to the map. "In the past month, your systems have destroyed 11 German reconnaissance vehicles. That we know of, probably more we haven't confirmed. Those 11 vehicles represent approximately 40 German soldiers killed. More importantly, those vehicles not gathering reconnaissance means Germans can't plan effective counterattacks, which means American soldiers aren't dying in defensive battles. We would have fought if Germans had better intelligence." He turned to look at Sullivan. "You're more valuable teaching than fighting. I know you don't like it, but mathematics doesn't care what you like. One engineer who trains 100 engineers who each install 50 systems equals 5,000 opportunities to kill Germans without Americans dying. You see that, right? Yes, sir. Then go teach. That's an order you're allowed to follow. Sullivan almost smiled. Almost. He reported to division headquarters on July 16th. Spent the next 6 weeks teaching classes, 2 classes per week, 20 engineers per class, the same demonstration, the same installation procedure, the same safety briefings. By September 1st, 140 engineers had completed Sullivan's training program. They spread across 8 divisions. Each one taught the technique to their units. August 23rd, Sullivan was wounded by German artillery fire while supervising a training exercise. Shrapnel hit his left shoulder. Not serious, but enough for 3 weeks of recovery time. He returned to training duty September 15th. Never returned to frontline combat. The war continued without him in a foxhole. But his work continued in every sector where American engineers buried pressure release systems that killed Germans who thought they understood American mine warfare. Sullivan spent the rest of the war teaching. He never complained, never requested transfer back to combat duty, just taught the classes, demonstrated the technique, answered the questions. He was a sergeant who'd figured out how to kill Germans with rusted shovel blades and salvaged springs. The Army decided that knowledge was more valuable than one more engineer in one more foxhole. Sullivan accepted that decision the same way he accepted everything. Silently, methodically, without wasted words or wasted motion. By November 1944, his pressure release mine system had killed an estimated 83 German reconnaissance vehicles. The mathematics of survival favored Americans now. And mathematics was something a Montana copper miner understood perfectly. June 20th, 0600 hours. Sullivan sat in the battalion briefing room with 40 other soldiers, listening to the S-2 intelligence officer describe how badly things were going. The lieutenant pointed at a map covered with red marks. Each mark represented a bypassed American mine. There were 237 of them. German reconnaissance has identified our mine patterns across the entire sector, the lieutenant said. Bypass rate is 93%. They're not even slowing down anymore. They spot our mines from 50 yards, mark the bypass routes, drive around them. He moved his pointer to blue marks on the map. American positions. Germans are building a detailed picture of our defensive layout. They know where we're strong, where we're weak, where they can punch through. The pointer stopped on a cluster of blue marks near 3rd Platoon's sector. Intelligence estimates they're preparing for a major counterattack. Probably within 72 hours. They've been gathering reconnaissance for this assault for 2 weeks, and we haven't stopped them. The battalion commander stood. Lieutenant Colonel Hargrove looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. Probably hadn't. Effective immediately. We're tripling mine density on all approach roads. I want 3 mines where we previously had 1. I want overlapping coverage. I want Germans to see mines everywhere they look. Sullivan sat in the back row and did mathematics in his head. 3 times as many mines means 3 times as many obvious patterns. Germans would spot them even easier, would bypass them even faster, would have even better intelligence for their counterattack. More mines wasn't the answer. Different mines was. After the briefing ended, Sullivan walked back to his foxhole, retrieved the components he'd carefully hidden 3 days ago. The shovel blades, the springs, the strikers, the teller mine fuses he'd supposedly destroyed. He looked at them for 5 minutes. Thought about Captain Brennan's direct order. Thought about regulations. Thought about court-martials. Then he thought about 4th Platoon's casualties on June 18th. 3 dead, 5 wounded. Germans had bypassed 8 standard mines to launch that attack. Sullivan had watched them carry the body bags past his position. He picked up the first shovel blade and started working. The choice wasn't complicated. Follow orders and watch more Americans die, or disobey orders and maybe save them. Sullivan had spent 12 years in copper mines where one mistake killed everyone in the tunnel. He'd learned to trust his engineering judgment over other people's rules. Rules were written by men who'd never been underground when a support beam failed. Combat was just another kind of tunnel, and Sullivan knew his system would work. He started digging at 0700 hours. The reinstallation went faster this time. Sullivan knew the procedure now, knew exactly how deep to dig, exactly how to position the pressure plate, exactly how to calibrate spring tension, exactly where to place the explosive charge. He worked alone during daylight hours when he could claim he was conducting routine mine maintenance. Worked alone after dark when nobody was watching. First system went in at 2nd Platoon's sector, the same location where he'd installed one before Brennan ordered him to remove it. Sullivan buried the shovel blade in the road surface, covered it with dirt and gravel until it looked exactly like debris. Positioned the decoy mine 30 yards forward where German headlights would catch it. Installation time, 1 hour, 43 minutes. Faster than before. Second system at 1st Platoon's eastern approach. The road where Germans had probed 3 times in the past week. Sullivan dug the cavity, installed the pressure plate, connected the striker mechanism, positioned the teller mine components, covered everything with road surface material. Third system at 3rd Platoon's northern perimeter. 4th at the company CP approach road. 5th, 6th, 7th at positions where German reconnaissance had been most active. By June 21st, Sullivan had reinstalled 5 systems. By June 22nd, 8 systems were buried and armed across the battalion sector. He worked with the same methodical precision he'd used in Montana copper mines. Measure twice, dig once. Check every connection, test every mechanism, trust the engineering. Corporal Eddie Kowalski found Sullivan working after dark on June 21st. Sullivan was burying a pressure plate at 3rd Platoon's sector when Kowalski appeared carrying a shovel. "Need help?" Kowalski asked. Sullivan looked at him. "Captain ordered these removed." "I know. I watched you take them out 4 days ago, and now I'm putting them back in." "I can see that." Kowalski knelt and started scooping dirt. Didn't ask why Sullivan was disobeying orders. Didn't ask about court-martials or regulations. Just helped bury the pressure plate. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. When the installation was complete, Kowalski stood and brushed dirt from his hands. "Germans came through 4th Platoon's sector last night," Kowalski said. "Bypassed every mine we laid. Killed 3 of our guys. I knew 2 of them, Morrison and Chen. Good soldiers." Sullivan said nothing. "Your system worked that first time," Kowalski continued. "Blew that scout car to pieces. Maybe it'll work again." "Maybe. You getting court-martialed for this?" "Probably." Kowalski nodded. "Better than watching more of our guys die because we followed regulations." He walked away. Never mentioned the conversation to anyone. June 22nd, 0400 hours. Sullivan finished the 8th installation. His hands were blistered from digging. His shoulders ached from carrying components. His eyes burned from working in darkness for 3 consecutive nights. But 8 systems were buried. 8 pressure release mechanisms waited for German vehicles. 8 chances to kill reconnaissance crews before they gathered more intelligence for their counterattack. Sullivan climbed into his foxhole and tried to sleep. Couldn't. His mind kept reviewing each installation, checking calculations, verifying mechanical sequences. Pressure plate positioned correctly? Yes. Spring tension calibrated for vehicle weight? Yes. Striker aligned with fuse? Yes. Explosive charge positioned for maximum effect? Yes. Decoy mine obvious enough to draw attention? Yes. Camouflage effective? Yes. 8 systems, 8 variables, 8 opportunities for something to go wrong. Sullivan had tested the mechanism with sandbags, had watched it function perfectly in controlled conditions. But controlled conditions weren't combat. Germans might not follow the expected pattern, might not stop at the decoy, might not park on the pressure plate, might not drive forward at the right moment. Or the spring might fail, the striker might miss a line, the fuse might not detonate, the explosive might be a dud. Sullivan understood engineering tolerances, understood that mechanisms designed by humans and built with salvaged materials sometimes failed. Understood that in combat, Murphy's Law applied with lethal precision. But he also understood that doing nothing guaranteed more Americans would die. 8 systems with uncertain success rates were better than 0 systems with guaranteed failure. He memorized each location. No written records, no mind maps, no documentation. If Captain Brennan or battalion command discovered the reinstallation, Sullivan wanted no paper trail that could implicate other engineers. This was his decision, his responsibility, his court-martial. Dawn arrived at 0543 hours. Sullivan gave up on sleep, ate cold rations, cleaned his rifle, waited. June 22nd passed slowly. Normal engineer duties, foxhole maintenance, equipment repair. Nobody noticed Sullivan had been awake for 3 nights. Nobody asked why he kept walking past the same road sections, checking sight lines, verifying his installations remained invisible. Captain Brennan conducted an inspection at 1100 hours. Walked through 2nd Platoon sector with his platoon leader. Stood 15 feet from Sullivan's buried pressure plate. Looked directly at the spot where the shovel blade lay hidden under road dirt. Saw nothing. Sullivan watched from 40 yards away. Brennan examined the decoy mine, checked the mine map, confirmed it matched documentation, then moved on. The pressure plate remained invisible. Perfect camouflage. Exactly what Sullivan had designed. At 1300 hours, battalion operations issued new orders. Triple mine density on all approaches. Standard M1 anti-tank mines. Standard burial depth. Standard spacing. Sullivan listened to the orders and said nothing. By tomorrow morning, the battalion would have 300 mines visible from 100 yards away. Germans would bypass every one of them. But they wouldn't bypass Sullivan's 8 systems, because Germans didn't know those systems existed. Afternoon turned to evening, evening to dusk, dusk to darkness. Sullivan sat in his foxhole and waited for Germans to come. 0115 hours, June 23rd. Sullivan heard vehicle engines to the northwest. Multiple vehicles. Diesel engines based on the sound. Germans conducted most reconnaissance between midnight and 0400 hours. Maximum darkness, minimum American visibility. The engine noise grew louder, then stopped. Approximately 800 yards away, Germans were staging, preparing for multiple reconnaissance probes across different sectors. Standard tactics: hit several positions simultaneously, overwhelm American response capability, gather intelligence while Americans were confused and scattered. Sullivan waited, listened. The Germans would come eventually, would probe his sector or someone else's, would find decoy mines, would stop to investigate. And if they parked on one of his pressure plates, they'd die. 0240 hours. New engine sounds. Single vehicle this time. Smaller engine. 4 cylinders. Sullivan knew that sound. SDKFZ 222 armored car, 4-wheeled reconnaissance vehicle, 20mm cannon, 3-man crew, fast, maneuverable, perfect for night reconnaissance. The vehicle approached from the northwest, coming down the road toward 2nd Platoon's position, the same road where Sullivan had buried his first reinstalled system. Sullivan climbed quietly from his foxhole, moved to a position 40 yards from the road, crouched behind a hedgerow, watched. The armored car appeared at 400 yards, headlights on, moving slowly, maybe 15 miles per hour. The crew was being cautious, looking for mines. 300 yards, 200 yards. The headlights caught Sullivan's decoy mine. Obvious. American M1 anti-tank mine sitting in the middle of the road, exactly where doctrine said to place it. The armored car stopped at 150 yards. Sullivan watched. This was the critical moment. Would Germans follow the pattern? Would they dismount to investigate? Would they do what Sullivan's system required? The commander stood in the turret, pointed at the mine, said something to his crew, then climbed out of the vehicle carrying a flashlight and probe pole. Perfect. The commander walked toward the decoy mine. The vehicle stayed in position, engine idling, driver still behind the wheel, gunner at the 20mm cannon. The commander advanced 30 yards, 40 yards. Now he was past the armored car. Walking toward the decoy mine, Sullivan had placed exactly where German eyes would see it. The vehicle sat in the road, stationary, 4,200 pounds of steel and men parked directly on top of Sullivan's buried shovel blade. The pressure plate was compressed, spring loaded, striker cocked, waiting for the weight to lift. The commander reached the decoy mine, knelt, examined it with his flashlight, used the probe pole to check for additional explosives. Found nothing because there was nothing to find. The decoy was just wood and metal, harmless. Sullivan watched the commander work. Methodical, professional, experienced reconnaissance soldier doing exactly what his training taught him. Check the mine. Confirm it's American. Mark the bypass route. Return to the vehicle. Continue the mission. The commander stood, pulled white engineer tape from his pocket, tied one end to a fence post marking the bypass route. Then he walked back toward the armored car. 40 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards. The commander climbed back into the vehicle, said something to the driver, probably told him to advance slowly around the marked bypass. The driver engaged the transmission. The armored car rolled forward, 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. The rear tires left the pressure plate. Weight lifted, spring released. Sullivan counted in his head. 0.1 seconds, 0.2 seconds, 0.3 seconds. The striker fired into the teller mine fuse. 0.4 seconds, 0.5 seconds. Chemical igniter activated. 0.6 seconds, 0.7 seconds. The explosive charge detonated. The explosion lit up the night like a flashbulb. Orange flame, black smoke, thunder that echoed across 3 miles of Norman countryside. The armored car's rear axle separated from the chassis. The vehicle lurched forward on destroyed suspension. Then the fuel tank ignited. Secondary explosion. Ammunition for the 20mm cannon started cooking off. Shells detonating inside the turret. Metal fragments spinning through the air. 3 seconds after the initial explosion, the armored car was an inferno. All 3 Germans were dead. The force of the blast under the rear axle had punched upward through the vehicle floor. The commander and gunner died instantly. The driver probably survived half a second longer. Not that it mattered. Sullivan watched the fire burn, felt the heat from 40 yards away, smelled gasoline and burned metal and something else he didn't want to think about. American positions across the battalion sector went to full alert. Machine guns pointed at the burning vehicle. Rifles aimed into darkness. Radios crackled with situation reports. And Captain Brennan was running toward the explosion. Sullivan stood and waited. No point hiding. Brennan would figure it out in about 30 seconds anyway. Brennan arrived at 0317 hours, 2 minutes after the explosion. He had his rifle ready, his helmet on, his face showing the expression of an officer expecting a major German assault. Instead, he found Sullivan standing in the field and a German armored car burning in the road. Brennan looked at the wreckage, looked at Sullivan, looked back at the wreckage. What happened? German scout car hit a mine, sir. Brennan walked to the road, examined the crater. It was 30 yards beyond the decoy mine. The decoy mine still sat undisturbed in the road, obvious, untouched. Brennan stared at the crater for 10 seconds, then at the decoy, then at Sullivan. You reinstalled them. Not a question, a statement. Yes, sir. I gave you a direct order to remove these. Yes, sir, you did. You disobeyed that order. Yes, sir. Brennan said nothing for 15 seconds. Just looked at the burning armored car, at the 3 German bodies visible in the flames, at the crater where Sullivan's pressure release mechanism had functioned exactly as designed. How many did you reinstall? 8, sir. Where are the others? Sullivan provided the locations. Methodically, precisely. 2nd Platoon Approach Road, 1st Platoon Eastern Perimeter, 3rd Platoon Northern Route, Company CP Access, 4 other positions where German reconnaissance operated. Brennan listened, memorized the locations, then looked at Sullivan again. You understand what you've done? Yes, sir. Disobeying direct orders, unauthorized ordnance, undocumented mine installations. Any one of those is court-martial material. Yes, sir. If that system had malfunctioned, if it had killed American soldiers, I'd have you in front of a firing squad. Yes, sir. They stood in silence. The armored car burned. Ammunition continued detonating. Somewhere in the distance, German engines started up. The reconnaissance force was withdrawing. 1 vehicle destroyed meant the mission was compromised. Brennan made his decision. We'll discuss this at morning briefing. Battalion commander needs to know what's buried in his sector. Yes, sir. And Sullivan? Sir? If you ever disobey my orders again, court-martial is the least of your problems. Clear? Yes, sir. Brennan walked back toward the company CP. Sullivan remained in the field, watching the German armored car burn. 7 more systems were buried across the battalion sector. 7 more chances to kill Germans who thought they understood American mine warfare. Sullivan climbed back into his foxhole and waited for morning. The mathematics of survival had just shifted in America's favor, and that was worth a court-martial. Sullivan was discharged in November 1945. He returned to Butte, Montana, and went back underground. 12 years before the war, 41 months during it, 18 years after. He retired from mining in 1963 with lungs that couldn't handle the dust anymore. The Bronze Star came in the mail in April 1946. Citation read, "For innovative engineering techniques that significantly reduced enemy reconnaissance effectiveness in the European theater of operations." The citation didn't mention unauthorized ordnance, didn't mention disobeyed orders, didn't mention the court-martial that Captain Brennan never filed. Sullivan put the medal in a drawer and never looked at it again. When reporters found him in the 1960s asking about the war, Sullivan gave them the same answer every time. Just did my job. They wanted stories about explosions and dead Germans and tactical innovation. Sullivan told them about Montana copper mines and how underground work teaches you to think 3-dimensionally. The technique he'd developed survived him. By 1947, the Army Corps of Engineers had incorporated pressure-release trigger mechanisms into their field manuals. They called it Delayed Action Pressure Release Mechanism in official documentation. Nobody called it that. Soldiers called it the rusty shovel, until the name became permanent. Combat engineers in Korea used it. Engineers in Vietnam adapted it. Modern IED tactics in Iraq and Afghanistan borrowed the principle. American counter-IED teams studied Sullivan's original design to understand how pressure release mechanisms functioned. Current Army Field Manual FM 334 includes pressure release systems as an authorized mine trigger method. The technique that violated every regulation in 1944 is now required doctrine. Sullivan died in March 1994, age 82, buried in Holy Cross Cemetery in Butte, Butte, Montana. His obituary mentioned his Bronze Star, his 41 months overseas, his 3 decades as a mining engineer. It didn't mention the 83 German vehicles, the 300 systems, the regulations he violated to save American lives. But every combat engineer who graduates from Fort Leonard Wood still learns about the rusty shovel. And every one of them learns the name of the Montana sergeant who invented it.